It was a really windy night, and all of a sudden the house started moving. And first thought is thinking, it's not sensible, it can't be the wind, because moving the house. And the chair was on wheels, it's an office chair, and was moving about 6 or 7 inches each way. I realised there was cracks in the brickwork above the roof. And thinking it was a natural disaster, a natural earthquake, I pointed it. It wasn't until about 3 or 4 months later that the word fracking came up in the papers.
There was a lot of speculation as to what had caused it, and then eventually Quadrilla, after they caused another earthquake, they eventually withdrew from fracking on that site.
This is 10 miles away from Presaw Farm. We've got cracks on either side of the door, cracks going all the way around, and I think the proof, beyond proof, if you look at the pins, they've actually come out. Now they don't slip out, it's plasterboard pins, they don't slip out, so you've had to have movement. The door ever since has stuck, that's a good day. It's been there's days where you've got to really shove it with your shoulder. All the way along the top of here. So there's been movement, if you can see. There's also a crack there you can see quite clearly. This is the crack inside. And on the outside of the house is where the cracks in the brickwork let up to the roof. This is our supporting wall. This bridge is next door, we've got a carport below us. And these are the cracks in here. And it's been that since April the 1st, 2011. Pollute, which is about 3 or 4 miles away from the Presaw Farm site, a lot of properties was damaged there. There's depressions in line with the sewage pipes. There's a lot more roadworks going on now, a lot more potholes. These are depressions where the subsurface has disappeared. And they're all over St Anne's. Blackpool Tower has had a collar on it from the day. And it's on the weakest part of Blackpool Tower. It's not moved for over a year. Has Blackpool Tower been damaged by the earthquake?
Somebody just decided to set up a meeting, and it was word of mouth really. It got round that we were going to have this meeting, and we came together in about October, November 2011, and that was it. RAF was formed.
We needed a group down in Lytham, because I live in Lytham. RAF was down in St Anne's, so what we did is we created Frack Free filed.
I live about a mile away from one of the sites that they were proposing, and I've got a little girl who's 3, you know, and she's going to school about a mile away from one of these sites, and so I felt that it was my responsibility to look into the health aspects of it, and I just couldn't believe what I heard.
Presaw Farm is behind Wheaton Barracks. It's an army camp for the families of the soldiers. The well at Presaw Farm is 1,500 feet away from the school. In Australia, they have to have a 2-kilometre exclusion zone. The EU released a paper last year saying anybody living close to a site, it's a health hazard. Now, what caused the earthquake was the fracking fluid that's been forced down the well migrating to a fault line. When it was lubricated, it jolted it. That's what caused the earthquake on April the 1st. And they damaged the well. They carried on fracking, knowing that the earthquake was caused by hitting a fault line. They carried on fracking for about another 6 weeks, till May the 10th of 2011, till they had the second earthquake that stopped the drilling.
We've had reports from independent geologists who say that certainly the Bowling Shale is not suitable for this sort of activity. There are too many faults.
The HSE have not visited that site in over 2.5 years. Because that well is damaged beyond repair, they want to bury this site now, put it back to a field. We want a public inquiry about this specific site. Why was it put 1,500 feet away from a school? Families live on here. How far away is that fault line from the vertical well? We've estimated it to be about 6,000 feet. The longest one that's been recorded so far is 300 feet. Why is that damaged? Is there any methane being released from there? When they were drilling for 6 weeks on there, that creates ozone. 1,500 feet from a school that's above about 20 feet, 30 feet above. Besides the well failing, that fracking is another route back up to the aquifer and up to the surface. It could have made its way up to the aquifer, and it's contaminating that aquifer. A bulk of it's almost a blueprint. If you look at it from the sky, you've got a dike there, I'd say about 1,000 metres away from the rig. You've got railway tracks beyond the dike, and then you've got a school 1,500 metres in that direction. They're going to go down to Belcombe and do exactly the same thing that they've done here, unless there's an inquiry, unless we get answers.
The numbers of wells that they're going to put in the file. It started at 400, now it's over 3,000. Well, they've only got a very narrow area in which they can get that number of wells. There's a corridor that runs up between the M6 and the conurbations that are on the coast, and that's the only area they're going to be able to get those wells in.
Lancashire oil company, this is their own data. 6% of the wells will fail on completion. 6%. That figure's rising. It's nearly 9% now. Now in 30 years, 50% of the wells will fail. In 30 years. In 100 years, 100% will fail. We've had 4 wells drilled on the foul coast. Anna's Road, the cement wouldn't set. Pre-salt farm is damaged beyond repair. We've just found out recently they're going to cap it 50 centimetres above the surface. So all that fracking fluid that's left down there will make its way up the pipe into the aquifer.
The fracking process requires millions and millions of gallons of drinking water, not brackish water. This is our pure drinking water, and it's going to come from United Utilities.
United Utilities are going to ship the water in to the drilling companies, millions of gallons, so they're going to make a fast buck on that. If the water gets contaminated, then they're going to have to ship the water in, and then we're going to be paying more for that. If there's any damage, and United Utilities have got to repair it, who will be paying that? People paying the bills.
I'm a Canadian scientist. I have 30 years experience in the oil and gas industry, and with the unconventional oil and gas, I've never seen such a level of greed and corruption and dishonesty. Not just in the industry, but in our regulators and the politicians. It doesn't seem to matter what country it is, whether it's here, Ireland, Australia, America, Canada. Found out that Encana had fractured directly into our drinking water supply, even though they gave the same promise they're giving here and in Ireland and everywhere they want to frack, that they would only frack far below the impermeable layer. And I also then uncovered a lot of industry and regulator research showing how serious a problem they have with gas migration, how deadly it is, how expensive it is.
My water dramatically changed. My water well became a better gas well, but I didn't know it at the time. At this time, I still believed there was no shallow drilling or fracking in my community. Suddenly I was getting incredibly painful caustic burns to my skin, irritated eyes, cracks on my hands after doing dishes. My water was so soft, I hardly ever had to buy soaps. And suddenly I put more and more and more soap and nothing. There was so much gas in my water that it would wet the edge of the tub and the floor, filling a bath, not soaking, but make it damp. And I poured fresh water one day for my dogs, and there's this thick smoke coming off it. My dogs backed away in revulsion from it. This is my water after Encana fracks the aquifer. The test from 2003 says the water poured clear. And the government finally came to test my water. On March 3rd, they were shocked by how much gas was in it. They looked around my property, noticed I didn't have cattle, and said, "Oh, you're to blame, because you don't run enough water." 3 days later, our Minister of Environment and his staff blamed me for the methane contamination because I used too much water. They didn't even have any lab results yet. They are still drilling and fracking us like crazy. The wells don't produce very well. They don't last very long. They're constantly having to come back, reperforate, refrac, and drill more and more and more to sustain this. It's an unsustainable, hungry monster.
My name is Dr. Marianne Lloyd-Smith, and I'm Senior Advisor for National Toxics Network, which is an Australian-based NGO. I was asked by Friends of the Earth to come and talk with local communities about what was happening in Australia with unconventional gas. We are not talking about chemicals that you would find under your kitchen sink or in the bathroom cabinet or something you wash your hair with, which is the constant claim of industry. These are benign, soft chemicals, they're not a problem. These are a serious bunch of toxins. As well as the chemicals you put in, there are also chemicals that you release that are naturally within the coal seam or the shale seam. And these can be anything from the BTEX group, which are the benzene, xylene, toluene, through to the volatile or semi-volatile organic compounds. And in that terminology, organic does not mean nice organic type. It just means they're not heavy metals and they're not inorganic. Many of these are toxic, many are carcinogens, and many help form particle pollution. They combine with ozone and are very nasty for people with respiratory problems, particularly children with asthma.
People have had all kinds of things, nosebleeds, everything from rashes, neurological conditions, headaches, nausea, vomiting, even their animals are sick.
The US risk assessment on shale gas emissions, I use that because it's the only formal risk assessment that's been done. They show that living within a half a mile of a shale gas well, you had a greater risk of respiratory or neurological symptoms and a higher lifetime risk of cancer. The Tara community in Queensland, we had a number of households, we have nearly 50 children on that estate. 60% of the residents there are showing symptoms and are complaining of a range of symptoms from eye and skin irritations through to some really serious rashes.
Some of the chemicals in the Hamlet water supply, evidence of petroleum distillates, benzene, ethylbenzene, xylenes, toluene. Toluene damages the brain, especially in developing children. My water well, evidence of petroleum distillates. The chromium went up by a factor of 45 after they fracked the aquifer that supplies my well. The alcohol and the phthalate, interestingly, are the same as found in some of the water wells contaminated in communities in the States.
In America, they won't disclose what chemicals they're using in a lot of states. Here they say it will be more transparent, however, they won't tell you until after they've used them, which to me isn't any good. And they will not, I've been to Quadrilla Open Days and they won't tell you what they're planning to use. I was told around 10 during the production phase, but they will continue to say that their frac fluid for the exploratory phase is non-toxic, which they've just got a rap for from the advertising standards, who said that was very misleading, because they were talking about the exploratory phase rather than the production phase, where they will inevitably have to use quite nasty chemicals.
The US EPA in 2011, they did a study which was finally released late last year, which showed 23 drinking water wells in Wyoming and Pavilion, Wyoming, had compounds, had contamination with chemicals that were associated with hydraulic fracturing. This was shale gas. In Queensland, coal seam gas, we had BTEX, that's benzene, benzene and xylene, in 5 out of the 14 monitoring water bores of one particular company called Arrow Energy. This is from their media release, they had to finally acknowledge it. Benzene, which is a carcinogen related to leukemia, particularly nasty substance, it was found at 6 and 15 times the Australian drinking water standard. The methane in the US drinking water wells, if you lived within a kilometre of a shale gas well, you had a much greater chance, up to 60 times the level of methane in your water. One of the rivers that goes through a gas field, and that is bubbling methane. It started to bubble methane about 6 months after the fracking started. Again, the industry said it's quite normal and natural. We spoke to the farmers, some of them have been there for 3 generations. Neither they or their parents had ever seen the river bubble like that. If you're pumping down squillions of litres of water and chemical and proppants at incredibly high pressure, there is no way you can control where those fractures will go. We would suggest that it probably is because the ground under it has been fractured by one of these unintentional long fractures.
There was one fracking that they were doing, and 7 miles away there was a shopping area with a big car park, and suddenly the car park set on fire. And it was gas that was escaping from 7 miles away. They couldn't put it out because the gas was constant.
This is Bruce Jack's water well. This is his water. The regulator had admitted it was contaminated with industry depth gas, but they didn't do anything for him. Finally, after a lot of work, he got 2 industry gas testers to come to fingerprint the gas in his water. He went to turn his well on as they were getting out of their truck. Bruce said when he turned the well on, he saw blue shooting up out of the well, and he turned his head. The industry gas testers were 10 meters away. They all ended up in the hospital. Bruce had to sell his herd of cattle. It's a dangerous contamination. So I go about 45 minutes to haul water. In the wintertime, it's very hard. Sometimes I have to line up a long time. And then we have a sour crude oil spill into the Red Deer River, which is where I get my water from. Where do I go now to get safe water? That happened in June. I still haven't found somewhere.
That is a particular well in Western Sydney which blew because they couldn't get the pressure right. That's quite common, and that went on for hours. It was extremely difficult to control. They finally did stop it, but by that time, so many millions of litres of chemical and water had gone into the air and contaminated the air around.
One spill that happened in the US, for example, that they had to evacuate a 2-mile radius around there. But here, and there was about 200 people that lived there in a 2-mile radius. Here, you have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people, and so it's just, what's the evacuation plan? How would they evacuate those people? They just don't have anything. It could be absolutely disastrous.
This is the next site where they're proposing to be drilling. This is the Grange Road site. They've already drilled on here. They broke 2 bits, by the way. It's about 4 foot above us, and then it slopes down a hill. So if there was a spill, and that was to fill up, and then it goes down a hill down to the town of Singleton. So this potentially could happen. Just look at all these fields, agriculture. All the fields have been planted. If the water table was contaminated in this area, all this would be devastated. Quadrilla found a loophole that if this site or any of these sites are under a hectare, then they don't have to do an environmental impact assessment. Now the EU and local campaign groups have obviously forced their hand, so now that they've got to do an environmental impact, this pad now can be as big as they want it to be. Is this going to be a super pad in this area? Because they do exist in America. We've got 40 wells on 1 pad.
The industry does a lot of flaring. They let off the excess gas, and that causes a number of nasty air pollutants. And the U.S. EPA have now banned flaring from 2015. U.K., they are still intending to flare.
Flare is anything from 10 to 30 feet, and that is burning off the excess methane as well as the chemicals and the drill fluid that also comes back up. And they are going to be, in this country, regulating that themselves.
In the US, for a 12-month study of shale, they found 44 hazardous air pollutants. Most of those are carcinogens, cancer-causing. And what was interesting is they found the highest levels during the initial drilling, not the fracturing.
A high percentage, up to 60% of the water that is used in the fracking process comes back as fracking sludge. Now this is radioactive, it's full of the chemicals that they put down there, and it's also full of the stuff that it collects when it's there. There's metals, there's other minerals that are not good for us. This all comes back up.
The industry who do the treatment will acknowledge they cannot remove many of the low molecular weight chemicals that are used by the hydraulic fracturing industry. We use them for dust suppression, like this. You spray it on a dusty road and keeps the dust down. I
wrote and asked, the fish scale shales are reportedly radioactive. Where is the waste going to go? Will it be dumped near my land? No, the regulator wrote back, they will not dump it adjacent to your land. They went a mile over. This is agricultural land. This is our food. You have far less land here and way more people.
With the fracking that they did, they sent it to Davyhulme near Manchester, and they treated it there and then dumped it in the Manchester Ship Canal. But then the Environment Agency wouldn't give them a permit to do it because it was too radioactive. So they stored it on site, I'm told, in lead tanks. We don't know what's happened to that water. We don't know where it's gone. Nobody will tell us.
What the government are saying is that they're going to sweep aside any form of obstacle, whether that be planning regulations, environmental health, sites of special scientific interest, air pollution, noise pollution from the methane venting. They're just going to sweep it all aside and give these people the go-ahead to desecrate our countryside.
Centrica are the company behind British Gas. Centrica have bought shares of 25% in Quadrilla. This same company have just found gas out in the Irish Sea that can take us past 2020. A company in the North Sea, next to the Shetland Islands, have found gas to take us beyond 2020. They keep saying shale gas is going to be a bridge between what we've got now and renewables. This is purely profit. If we've got enough gas in the northwest to see us for the next 40 years, why are they drilling the rest of the country? This is from Mark Menzies, our local MP, back in March. He said there's 94,000 jobs in the northwest alone, in the renewable and green industry. Now, what Quadrilla has just said recently, the IOD, the Institute of Directors, which they financed this report, they said there were 74,000 jobs potentially in the whole of the UK.
It's very disturbing when you look at who's advising the government. You have people with so many vested interests. George Brown's father-in-law, for example, is a lobbyist for the oil and gas industry. We've got Lord John Brown, the ex-BP chief, who's advising the government and said he'll throw as much money towards it as it's needed to make it happen.
What we've found in Australia is where there is concerted community resistance, companies do not go. And so in a region that I live in, where there were two companies building wells. One already had about 14, 15 wells already dug, ready to go into production. It had its production licence. The resistance from the community was so strong that they've basically packed up their bags, closed up shop, are remediating those wells and are leaving. And a company that both UK and Australia shares, Dart Energy, which we know is here trying to do hydraulic fracturing and coal bed methane in Scotland and parts of England, they have already left Australia. They have announced in the last month that, I'm sorry, Australia is just becoming a no-go area, we don't want to work there.
We've done public meetings all over the Fylde Coast and rallied an enormous amount of support. The movement is growing and growing.
People are dying and everything now in America. They've said, come on, you know what's going to happen, now you fight against it. We, when it first started off, we didn't know. And we didn't know to fight against it, now we do.
Fight it, get it delayed. We've had successes. We found out that, Quadrilla have breached their planning regulations, they got delayed. There's all sorts of things you can be doing. You don't have to roll over and accept this. If you don't want it, fight it.
Band-Aid in New York. It's banned in France, and Bulgaria, they came out on the street in thousands. And it's banned in Bulgaria. We will stop this, but we can only do it together. And we have to do it now.
We will not see